Snow had been falling on Duluth, Minnesota since Thursday, the soft accumulating kind that changes the sound of a city. And by Saturday morning the East Hillside neighborhood was quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like held breath. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb had driven up from the Twin Cities the night before with one address on his phone, and a reason he couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't been in his unit. He just knew. In the passenger seat, Coda lifted his head from his paws. Then he turned toward the window and placed both front feet on the door, which he did not do. The address on Marcus's phone was a yellow house on East 3rd Street. But East 3rd Street had 17 houses on it, and the yellow one had new siding now, and someone else's name on the mailbox. And what Marcus found when he started knocking on the doors of that block, 11 of them in the snow, before anyone answered. And what he found behind the 12th would uncover a secret that an entire street had agreed, without quite agreeing, to keep. If this is the kind of story you come here for, subscribe now, so you're here when the next one is told. Marcus had served 11 years in the Marines, the last 4 in Force Reconnaissance, and had come home to Minneapolis in 2022 with a medical separation and a left hand that had lost 2 fingers and most of its grip strength to a device outside Kandahar in 2018. He had learned to live with the hand the way you learn to live with anything you cannot change, methodically, without self-pity, by finding out what it could still do and building from there. He worked now as a facilities manager for a school district in St. Paul, which was useful work and honest work. And he drove Coda to the job site most mornings because Coda was better than any alarm system he'd ever purchased, and the principals liked him. He called his mother every Sunday. He did not call the people from his unit as often as he should, because calling them required him to be in a place he had not always been ready to go back to, and grief had its own schedule that didn't consult him before arriving. The reason Marcus was in Duluth on a Saturday in February was a woman named Iris Mead. Coda was a 4-year-old Siberian husky, gray and white, with one blue eye and one brown eye, and a gait that looked unhurried and covered ground faster than you expected. He was the kind of dog who made children stop on sidewalks and ask if they could pet him, and his answer was always yes. Because Coda had decided early that the world was worth engaging and had not found a reason to revise this position. He was not loud. When something was wrong, he went still in the specific way that stillness is louder than any noise, and Marcus had learned to read the difference between a dog resting and a dog waiting. Iris Mead was 76 years old. She had lived on East 3rd Street for 31 years, in a yellow house that was no longer yellow. The siding had been replaced by whoever owned it now, and she had been the kind of neighbor that streets are built around, the woman who kept track of when the elderly man at the end of the block hadn't taken in his newspaper, who organized the block's response when the pipes froze in 2009, who made food when people couldn't and didn't mention it afterward. She had taught piano for 20 years out of her front room. And her students, some of them now in their 40s, still sent her cards at Christmas because she had been the kind of teacher who taught more than piano. Her husband Thomas had died in 2016. She had a daughter named Cynthia who lived in Rochester. She had, until 14 months ago, been a consistent presence in the life of the East Hillside neighborhood, visible at the community garden on Morgan Park, at the Lutheran Church on 4th Street, at the counter of the bakery on Superior, where she went every Saturday morning for a cinnamon roll and a conversation with anyone who was there to have one. 14 months ago, she had stopped being visible. Marcus knew Iris Mead because of his unit, specifically because of a gunnery sergeant named Thomas Webb, his father's brother, his Uncle Tom, who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and come home to Duluth in 1971 and lived on East 3rd Street for 30 years and been, by the account of everyone who had known him, the kind of man his neighborhood depended on, without ever having to think about it. Tom Webb had died of a stroke in 2019. And Iris Mead had been there when it happened, had been the one who called the ambulance, who sat with him until it arrived, who called Marcus's father from the hospital and stayed on the phone for 40 minutes while his father drove from Minneapolis. She had done all of this without being asked, because that was who she was. Marcus had sent a card after Tom's funeral. Iris had written back, in the specific, careful penmanship of a woman of her generation, a letter that described Tom Webb the way you describe someone you understood rather than simply knew. The things he cared about, the way he moved through a neighborhood, the fact that he had been present at her husband Thomas's deathbed in 2016, and that she had not forgotten it. Marcus had read that letter 3 times and put it in the drawer where he kept the things he didn't want to lose. In January, he had sent a card to Iris's address on East 3rd Street. It had come back. Return to sender, no forwarding address. He had tried the phone number he had for her. Disconnected, he had called the Lutheran Church on 4th Street. The woman who answered said Iris hadn't been to services in over a year, that they tried to reach her, that her daughter had called once to say she was fine and being cared for, and that was the last they'd heard. The phrase being cared for had sat in Marcus's chest like something he needed to put down, and couldn't. He drove to Duluth on Friday night. East 3rd Street was quiet under its snow. The yellow house was no longer yellow. He went to the first door, a green Cape Cod at the corner, at 8:30 in the morning, too early, maybe. But the snow was still falling, and he didn't have time for polite hours. An older woman answered. He said he was looking for Iris Mead. She said she didn't know the name. Closed the door. He went to the second door. A man in his 30s answered in a bathrobe. Didn't know the name. Third door. No answer. Fourth door. A woman who looked at him carefully and said she'd heard the name but didn't know her personally. Coda walked beside Marcus from door to door, patient. His breath making small clouds in the February air, his paws finding the salted portions of each walk with the careful precision of a dog who has decided the cold is a fact and not a complaint. At the 6th door, Marcus noticed something. Not a refusal. Just a pause before the refusal. The kind of pause that belongs to a person deciding something rather than answering something. At the 8th door, the same pause. Longer. At the 10th door, a man around 60 who looked at Coda for a moment before he looked at Marcus, and who said, very carefully, I don't know anything about that, in the specific way you say something you have rehearsed. At the 11th door, no one answered, but a curtain moved. Have you ever knocked on 11 doors looking for someone and found that the neighborhood had decided, in some quiet collective way, not to tell you what it knew? If you've been the person who finally opened the 12th door, or if you've been on the wrong side of a silence like that, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. The 12th door was 3 houses back from the end of the block. A white 2-story that had a wind chime on the porch that was making the particular sound of a thing doing its job badly in the cold. Marcus knocked. Coda had gone still beside him, not the patient stillness of the walk, a different stillness. His head had dropped 1 degree. His ears were forward. He was reading something coming from behind the door before the door had opened. A woman answered. She was around 50, gray-streaked hair, a cardigan over her pajamas, the specific expression of someone who was not surprised to see a person knocking. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Coda. She looked at Marcus again. Then she said, "You're looking for Iris?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. She held the door open. Then, You'd better come in." Her name was Donna Speakman. She had lived on the block for 22 years and had known Iris Meade for all of them. She made coffee and she told Marcus what she knew, which was more than anyone else on the block had told him, and as she talked, he understood the pauses at the 6th door and the 8th door and the 10th door. Understood what a neighborhood looks like when it has seen something it doesn't know how to stop and has decided that silence is the only protection it has to offer. Iris's daughter, Cynthia, had come from Rochester 14 months ago with a man named Derek Paulson, who was her fiancé of 4 months, and who was, by Donna's account, the kind of man who wore the right words in the right order and moved through a room as though he'd already been given the keys. He had been attentive to Iris's needs, Donna said, in the specific way that attentiveness can be a form of control, managing her schedule, answering her phone, being present in the house whenever anyone came to the door. The piano students had stopped coming. The Saturday bakery visits had stopped. The community garden had a gap in it where Iris's plot had been. Donna had knocked on Iris's door twice. The first time Derek had answered and said Iris was resting. The second time Iris had answered, with Derek in the doorway behind her, and had said she was fine, said it in the careful, flat register of someone who has been told what to say and is deciding whether to say something else, and has decided, this time, not to. Donna had stood on the porch and looked at Iris's face and looked at the hand that was holding the door edge, the knuckles tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, and she had said, "Iris, you can call me any time," and Iris had said, "I know that." Donna and Derek had closed the door. Donna had called Cynthia 2 weeks later. Cynthia had said her mother was adjusting to a new routine and that she appreciated the concern. The rest of the block had their own versions of the same story. The pauses at the doors were not cruelty. They were the paralysis of people who had witnessed something and reported it and been thanked and not believed, and who had concluded that a stranger at the door asking questions was either going to make things worse or get the same answer they had gotten. But the real secret, the one the block didn't know yet, was sitting in Iris's house 3 doors down, and Coda was already pointing at it. What Donna showed Marcus next changed what he thought he was dealing with. She had a folder. She was that kind of neighbor. The kind who keeps records when she senses she may need them, and in it were 3 things. A photograph she had taken from her upstairs window of Iris on the porch in October, standing in the cold in a house dress without a coat while Derek's car was in the drive. A printed copy of a county property records search she had run online in November, which showed that a quitclaim deed transferring a 40% interest in Iris's home to Derek Paulson had been recorded in August, and a printout of the retirement account statement Iris had accidentally dropped on the sidewalk in September, before Donna fully understood what was happening, which showed a withdrawal of $60,000 in July. Coda had been sitting beside Donna's kitchen table the entire time. When she put the folder down, he stood up, walked to the front window, and looked at the house 3 doors down for a long moment without moving. Marcus called a legal aid attorney named Sheila Voss in Duluth that he had found through the VA's Elder Veteran Support Network. Sheila picked up on the second ring, a Saturday morning in February, which told him everything he needed to know about her. He described the quitclaim deed and the account withdrawal and 14 months of a neighborhood held quiet by helplessness. Sheila said the word undue influence in the precise flat way of a lawyer naming a thing she has named before and intends to name in a filing before the week is out. If you were standing where Marcus was standing right now, folder in hand, Coda at the window, Sheila Voss on the phone, what would you have done next? Type yes or no below. I read every comment. The urgency came on Sunday evening in a text from Donna. A moving truck had been scheduled. She had overheard Derek on the phone in the driveway. The window above his head was Donna's bathroom window, and he did not know that. Talking about an assisted living facility in Rochester, and a closing date, and a storage unit for the furniture. The timeline was 10 days. Marcus called his cousin in Duluth, who was a social worker at St. Luke's, and who had 3 colleagues at the County Adult Protective Services office, and who said, when Marcus explained the situation, that she would be at Donna's house in the morning. He called Sheila back. Sheila said she had already started the filing. And he drove to East 3rd Street at 7:30 Monday morning and knocked on the 12th door. Derek Paulson came to Iris's house on Wednesday. He came alone, which told Marcus something, that he had calculated this as a cleanup rather than a confrontation. A matter of paperwork and persuasion and the practiced confidence of a man who had been doing this long enough to believe that his version of events was the version that would prevail. He had a folder of his own. He knocked twice. Marcus opened the door. The front room held Marcus, Sheila Voss, Donna Speakman, Marcus's cousin Adrienne from St. Luke's, and a county apps investigator named Carl Burgess, who had driven in from the county offices on the other side of Duluth, because Sheila had sent him the quitclaim deed and the account records the previous evening, and he had looked at them and come in on his day off. Iris Mead sat in the chair by the window, her chair, in her house, with the piano behind her that she had been teaching on for 20 years, and that was still there, still tuned, still hers. She wore her church cardigan. Her hands were in her lap. She was looking at the door when it opened. Coda was at Marcus's side. And the moment Derek Paulson stepped through the door, Coda's entire posture changed. A single fluid shift that went from still to something else. Something that was not movement and not stillness, but the loaded state between them. The growl came from low in his chest, continuous, without break. His eyes fixed on Derek. When Derek took a step toward the room, Coda stepped forward, not lunging, stepping, with the absolute unhurried certainty of a dog who has already decided and is simply marking the line. Derek stopped. Derek looked around the room. His face performed the recalibration of a man who expected one conversation and has walked into a different one. He said he was there to help with arrangements. He said everything he had been done in consultation with Cynthia and with Iris's well-being as the only consideration. He said the quitclaim deed had been Iris's idea, a matter of estate planning, properly notarized. He said the account withdrawal had been discussed. He said the facility in Rochester was excellent and that Iris had agreed to the visit. The room listened. Then Iris said, "I never signed anything I understood." 7 words. Sitting in her own chair, in her own house, with her hands still in her lap and her voice still careful and quiet. The voice of a woman who has been careful and quiet for 14 months and has decided that this room, finally, is the room where careful and quiet can say the true thing. Derek's composure did not shatter. It drained. There was no other word for it. The expression of a man watching the ground under a structure he built go soft, watching the thing he believed was secured begin to move, with witnesses on all sides and a dog between him and the only person in the room whose signature he needed. Carl Burgess spoke from the corner. Sheila spoke from the table. What followed was not a confrontation in the dramatic sense. It was a reckoning in the accounting sense, careful and numbered and without exit. The quitclaim deed. The account withdrawal. The 14 months of a neighborhood held silent. The moving truck. The 10 days. Sheila named each one. Carl Burgess confirmed each one. Marcus said nothing at all, because nothing was required of him except to stand where he was standing, beside the door, next to a dog who had made the room's position clear before anyone spoke. Derek looked at the door twice. The second time, Coda shifted 1 inch, and he stopped looking. He left. Coda watched the window until Derek's car had gone past the end of the block. Then he walked to Iris's chair, sat beside it, and put his head on the arm the way he had done exactly once before, in a house in St. Paul when Marcus had been awake at 2 in the morning and needed the room to feel like a room again. Iris put her hand on Coda's head. She did not say anything. She looked at the piano for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus and said, "Do you know what your Uncle Tom used to say about this block?" "Tell me," Marcus said. She did. For a long time. What happened in the weeks that followed moved through the East Hillside neighborhood the way things move through places where people have been paying attention and waiting for permission to act. Quickly, and with the specific warmth of a community that has been holding its breath and can finally let it out. The quitclaim deed was challenged, and the challenge was sustained. The account records went to the county attorney's office with Sheila's filing, and the county attorney's office opened a formal inquiry. Derek Paulson left Duluth before the inquiry concluded, which is its own kind of conclusion. Cynthia came from Rochester not with a brochure but with an apology, a long one, delivered in her mother's front room on a Sunday afternoon while Marcus waited on the porch, because it was not his apology to witness. She came back the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. The Lutheran Church on 4th Street sent a delegation of 3 women with a casserole and a card signed by 46 members of the congregation, many of whom had been in the community garden and the Saturday bakery line, and the front room piano students across 31 years. The card was not signed, "We're glad you're back." It was signed, "We knew you were still here." Iris read it at her kitchen table and did not say what she thought about it, but she kept it on the counter where she could see it. Marcus drove back to Duluth in April. The snow was gone. The community garden on Morgan Park had an open plot, and Iris's name had been penciled into the volunteer sign-up sheet in Donna Speakman's handwriting. On a Saturday morning, Marcus walked with Coda to the bakery on Superior and sat at the counter beside Iris while she had her cinnamon roll and talked to whoever was there to talk to, which was several people, because the word had gotten around that she was back and people wanted to confirm it in person. Coda lay at their feet with his chin on his paws and the specific contentment of a dog who has done what he came to do and is now simply present, which is sometimes the most important thing a dog can be. Marcus thought about Tom Webb on that walk back, thought about his uncle's 30 years on this block, the way Tom had moved through a neighborhood like a man who understood that presence is not passive, that showing up is a verb, that the debt between people who have served and the people who watched over them is circular and runs in both directions. He thought about the card Iris had written after Tom's funeral and the drawer where he kept the things he didn't want to lose. He thought about 11 doors and the quiet behind them, and one door, finally, that opened. Some debts don't announce themselves. You don't know you're carrying one until something, a returned letter, a disconnected phone, a dog who stands up in a moving car, tells you it's time to pay it. Marcus Webb had the same Saturday morning anyone else had. He drove to Duluth on a Friday night because a card came back with no forwarding address, and he knew what that meant. He knocked on 11 doors and found 11 silences, and he did not stop at the 11th. He knocked on the 12th. This story is for every neighbor who kept watch from a window and didn't know how to stop what they were seeing, and for everyone who finally opened the door when someone worth trusting came knocking, and for anyone who has ever repaid a debt to the dead by showing up for the living. Is there an Iris in your life? Someone the neighborhood has quietly lost track of? Someone you've been meaning to check on? Someone who might be behind a door you haven't knocked on yet? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. Every story on this channel is about the door you choose to knock on. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.